Pat's Interference is brought to you by FanDuel, the exclusive wagering partner of the CLNS Media Network.
Okay, one of the people's favorite guests is back because I think he forgot to read the fine print in his Boston Herald contract where I get to bug him to come on my podcast, and he pretty much has to say yes because I'm going to see Doug tomorrow, as I saw him today, as I saw him yesterday, and we're talking now every day. Doug Kyed of the Boston Herald. How's that sound, by the way, after now we're coming up on like your 2-month anniversary here?
Sounds good. I still like it. I'm going to stay on board. I like working with you. I like working with the Herald. It sounds great to me.
Awesome. Good. 2-month anniversary. That coming out of my mouth felt like I should go back to 6th grade with my first girlfriend. You know, that's just, it's maybe the lamest term we've used on here. But hey, that's kind of what it is. 2 months. Welcome. Also, our 101st episode here today. It was brought to my attention. I did 100 earlier this week. We had some fake trades. Didn't really celebrate. I don't know. Maybe I'll celebrate on my year and 2-month anniversary coming up. TBD. So today, the plan is to cover everything that we learned for the Patriots roster cuts with Doug. They have a 53-man roster. They have a mostly complete practice squad. And everything, of course, is brought to you by FanDuel, the exclusive wagering partner of the CLNS Media Network. We did this last time you were on. I haven't done it with anyone else. So let's bring it back. Spit it out. 30 seconds. What'd you learn about this team the last 2 days?
I learned that the Patriots didn't really like their quarterback situation, which I don't think a lot of people were fully aware of before cutdowns. You know, we'll talk a little bit more about Bailey Zappe here in the future, but I mean, Bill O'Brien said not a month ago that this was one of the best quarterback rooms that he's been a part of. And then at the end of cutdowns, there was one guy left in there. And obviously now they brought a couple guys back, but I don't think we really knew the full extent of how the Patriots felt about Bailey Zappe, Malik Cunningham, Trace McSorley, everything before cutdowns. And now it's blatantly obvious that they didn't really value anyone behind Mac Jones.
That's spot on. I'm going to go in the other direction, though, and that the Patriots see what we saw. And that was an offensive line that is just flatly not good enough because 11 offensive linemen, which they have right now in the 53-man roster, that's more than 20% of the entire roster, is excessive. And I wrote about this 3 weeks ago. You and I have been tweeting about this, reporting it. But they were preparing in their preseason opener, the way Bill O'Brien called plays. He called plays in training camp for worst case scenario. And this roster construction is them packing the bunker with supplies, with food, canned goods, knowing that Hurricane Cox and Graham and Jordan Davis is barreling down to Foxborough and it's hitting September 10th. And then
you're talking about Zach.
Yeah, no, not yet. He's his own hurricane in the rugby field. But the Eagles are coming, and you can't afford to have that. So they're bundling up with as many tackles and offensive linemen as they can because 11 is a lot. And so as much as we always go, and this is true, there is always one surprise on cutdown day with the Patriots, they're still aligned with our larger reality as we see it. And that was whether you had 50 or 51 people out of the 53-man roster projections, as I think you did and Mark Daniels did, and I might have, depending on whatever it was, I did that a couple of days ago. But ultimately, they're more in touch with reality, which is generally a good thing after last season than sometimes people say, because Bill Belichick's unpredictable or this or that. Ultimately, they see the roster as we saw it. And I think that's a good thing right now. So let's go back to Bailey Zappe, though, because obviously he's a headliner. You had some reporting around what happened with him. I'll just share what I heard from someone within the team, which was 2 words. Quote, he stunk. And that covered training camp. It covered the preseason. We can go into the numbers in a second, but the things that you heard were pretty similar.
Yeah, and that's just that the performance wasn't good enough, that he wasn't picking up the offense, fast enough, so that he wasn't a good enough fit for what Bill O'Brien wanted to do. And it's essentially just what I heard from multiple people was that it wasn't good enough. And, what I have expected, like if I had heard, a week ago, we just don't think that Bailey's good enough, would I have expected them to cut him? Probably still not, just because there was no safety net there in case something happens to Mac Jones. But I think to some degree, you have to give Bill Belichick credit for just saying like, all right, I mean, you haven't been good enough. You don't deserve to make this 53-man roster. You might be a quarterback. We might need you, but we want to set a precedent here for players who are good enough to make the team, and you're not one of them. I do want to go on a slightly mini rant about this, though, because I feel like I've seen too many people say like, oh, yeah, like Bill Belichick took a risk and it really paid off. He waived his 2 quarterbacks and still wound up getting them on the practice squad. And like, yeah, that's great. But the Patriots also drafted a quarterback a year ago in the 4th round that they did not care about losing, that they let all other 31 teams get a crack at, and they did not care if any of those other teams claimed him. And like, maybe they were hoping that none of the teams claimed him, but that's not really how waiving a player works. Like, you have to accept that someone else could take this player. So I don't really look at it. Like, I don't think that this is a way to praise Bill Belichick. I think Mike Florio was the latest one to do it. He wrote a piece of like, oh, Bill Belichick's still playing chess and everyone else is playing checkers. Like, that's not what this is. They cut a player that wasn't good enough.
Was poker and everyone else is playing 52 pickup. And that it was maybe 5 paragraphs. And I don't mean to spend part of the podcast dumping on Mike Florio. Anyone could do that in their own time. But it just felt like an article for the sake of the headline. Like, okay, you had one line, but what was the substance behind it? And you're absolutely right. In an ideal world, the Patriots don't cut Bailey Zappe because he's good enough, not only in our eyes on the outside, but their eyes on the inside. Because 5 weeks ago, Bill Belichick is saying, we're going to let them compete, meaning Mac and Zappe and McSorley, though we all know what that really meant, and see how it goes. And how it went is Zappe's technically not on the team.
Right. Yeah. And like, no one's praising the Panthers right now for cutting Matt Corral after a season. Like, if they wind up, adding him to their practice squad, no one's gonna be like, oh, great job, Panthers. You drafted quarterback in the 3rd round and wound up having him on your practice squad a year later. And I guess like, I don't want to necessarily dump on Bill Belichick too much either, because I do think he deserves some praise for cutting his losses and kind of making this statement by cutting Bailey Zappe. I don't think it's the end of the world that they had to trade away Pierre Strong and cut Bailey Zappe. But at the same time, 4th round pick should be on your team for more than a year. And as you just mentioned, Bailey Zappe technically not on the team right now. And if he goes on to have success or winds up being a star, whatever it is with the Patriots in the future, the reality is that they still did cut him. And it wound up working out. They wound up on the practice squad, but like, they still made the decision to give him away to any one of the other 31 teams.
So let's back up a second, because I think in the way that, we are highlighting what the Patriots did was in no way a vote of confidence, but in fact, the exact opposite. And there's reporting out there that the Patriots still wanted him back as your backup quarterback. If you wanted him as your backup quarterback, you keep him on the team. It's as simple as that. I believe other reporting that they wanted a veteran as a backup, ideally a Colt McCoy who's got an elbow injury, or somebody else. Obviously couldn't find that veteran because Bailey Zappe's back. But people listening to this, probably Bailey Zappe fans, would go, where the hell were you guys at every single practice, not documenting that Bailey Zappe could have been cut? And I'll tell you this, I also, like Doug, would not have expected Bailey Zappe to be cut, even if I had heard the same thing I heard, which was he stunk in that covered preseason and training camp. But here are the numbers. Preseason, he was 30 of 51. That's sub 60% completion percentage for 253 yards, 1 touchdown, 5 sacks. You, of course, will remember the 3 fumbles in 1 game in the preseason finale. Training camp, he completed 64% of his passes. He had 6 interceptions in team periods that led all quarterbacks. And that's with maybe 1 or 2 reps with the starters, and that was it. So he had the highest interception percentage. He took the most sacks in the preseason and in training camp, and is a guy who routinely struggled with batted passes at the line because he's 6 foot. That's how God made him. I'm not going to knock him, but that's the reality if you're going to make someone your backup quarterback. So I wrote in the last couple of days of camp, he was in my duds category. Okay. And you and I talked about this being like, is Bailey really going to be a dud for a second straight day? It was like, yeah, that's just what it is. Yeah. But we didn't go to the lengths that the Patriots did, obviously cutting him. The gamble paid off. I'll just ask you this. Not playing the result, knowing that he cleared waivers with Malik Cunningham, by the way, who we can talk about, would you have made that gamble based on his performance in camp and the available market on the outside with the veterans who were hanging out somewhere?
Probably not, even though I like Bill Belichick, like I said, making this statement by saying your camp stunk and you're cut. But I still think that he showed enough last year in those 2 games, not to compete with Mac Jones, because that was never the reality of the summer, but like, maybe there's something there to work with. But I mean, the simple fact does remain that they switched offenses, and that seems to possibly be part of this too. And, something that I've heard is that he just didn't seem to be fitting into what the Patriots were asking him to do this summer. And it is interesting because like you mentioned, sometimes, we get so deep into the weeds of things, you would be like, oh, who was a dud today? And I feel like every time you ask me that question, because it wasn't very often, I was like, I kind of think Bailey Zappe was a dud today.
Yeah.
But I still don't know if it reached the level of cutting him. Like, I know like the stats aren't horrible. That's the thing, is that they're middling. They're not terrible. And
well, they're like a backup quarterback, like this isn't the bar of what Mac Jones needs to meet or anyone who's going to play, but at least just be human duct tape for the offense if the starter misses a couple games, which obviously Mac did last year. And Bailey was better than duct tape. He was Gorilla Glue. I don't know, pick your adhesive, but he was really good in those couple of games, which I want to get back to, but keep going.
Yeah, and I mean, I'll go into that as well, because I think it's pretty obvious that the Patriots kind of tailored their offense to what Bailey Zappe could do last year. They kind of schemed it up so that he could play the best that he possibly could. And then this year, it felt like they kind of threw the whole offense at him and said, all right, let's see how you do sinking or swimming when we give you everything that Bill O'Brien can put out there for you. And didn't go as well. But I don't know, like, if it is Colt McCoy, how much better is it going to look if he's getting thrown everything that Bill O'Brien can throw at them? And if you think that this guy has some sort of developmental traits, wouldn't it be worth another year of saying like, all right, if you have to go in there, we'll tailor the offense to you and, scheme things up a little bit more for you. I don't know. I think that this does show you that they didn't think that there was anything developmental about Bailey Zappe. He is what he was last year. He is what he is, that he's not going to significantly or dramatically improve, and that, who he is as a quarterback just isn't good enough to ever compete for a starting role. And quite frankly, wasn't even good enough to guarantee his role as the backup.
And that's the most damning part about this, is I wrote, which will be in the Herald tomorrow, meaning by the time people listen to this today or the day before, that they saw value either short-term in just the roster spot or long-term in cutting bait was Bailey Zappe. Long-term would have been had they identified someone else to come in and, you're able to improve that position with another player. It didn't happen. He's back. I still think he can get back to the level we saw last year, which was a serviceable backup. And that could be his career. He could be Chase Daniel 1.5, shorter quarterback, smarter, didn't have as much production in college, different offense, blah, blah, blah. That path, I think, is still there. But three things about this. One, you mentioned taking the whole offense in. And he spoke in late July about how the game was slowing down for him. And his year two leap was specifically seeing things more clearly pre and post snap. The way he was holding the ball, I've described it like a little boy with his blanket, suggests that somewhere pre or post snap, or both, he had issues. And granted, this defense is wildly complicated and disguises, more than a spy, Like, they're all over the place in that defense. But this is his second year facing that defense. And in this new offense, it's a little unusual that this offense actually mirrors what he did in college more than what they did last year with Matt Patricia and Joe Judge. Maybe the shotgun to under center splits are a little different, but I'm talking about RPOs, more spread concepts. The running game involves the quarterback a little bit more. Like, those things should have favored him. On that offense, number two, that he did last year, like those 3 games, 2.5, whatever you want to call it, 3 total if you had Green Bay and Chicago, put them together, I think really highlight how much an opponent can, in a small sample, can influence what we think of a player. Because I don't think you could have picked 2 better defenses at that time of the year to face than the Lions in week 5 and the Browns in week 6 to have Bailey Zappe play. They were atrocious. They couldn't tackle. They could barely stop the run. And he got under center, faked the run, threw the ball, and found a lot of receivers, and they pull away with a win, mostly thanks to, in that Detroit game, a defensive touchdown. The last thing I'll say is this. In, asking around about what happened here, even Tuesday after it happened with some people close, not only there was a mix of surprise, even from the folks who told me, quote, he stunk, but people pretty embedded in that organization didn't know this was going to happen until after practice when it did. So this was something they kept close to the vest. And yet I'm not positive Bill Belichick wasn't thinking about as far as back as the preseason finale, when you'll remember, we wrote about this.
Yeah.
He leaves in the first half of Tennessee. In comes Trace McSorley, 3 and out. Kneels the ball out, first half over. And the second half starts, and it's not McSorley, and it's not Malik Cunningham.
Right.
It was your backup then, Bailey Zappe, who played the whole second half. So of all that, sorry, I'm just passing the ball. What do you got?
No, I mean, I think that in retrospect, we probably should have looked at that a little bit more damningly for Bailey Zappe, and maybe that's when some alarms should have gone off in our head. But to your point, when I reached out to someone, my question was like basically what the hell happened with Bailey Zappe, and the answer was that's a question a lot of people would like answered right now, and that was by someone within the organization. So, yeah, people were surprised by this. And I think something that's, I don't know, the other thing here too is yesterday during cutdown date, I think we were all kind of wondering why is Bill Belichick making cuts after practice? And maybe the answer to that was they didn't want one quarterback out there at practice. Maybe they needed still the 2 to 3 quarterbacks, if you include Malik Cunningham, out there in practice. And that's why they released most of their players as they were walking off the practice field. But that must have come as a huge shock to Bailey Zappe as well, because I can't imagine that he saw this coming, that
no.
Hey, all right, go out there for a 2-hour practice. And hey, pal, by the way, you're walking off the practice field, you're cut. That's just, that must have been a crazy experience for him. And we all kind of tried to talk to him in the locker room today. That got shut down by media relations. We'll see what he eventually has to say. The Patriots usually have rules against practice squad players talking. We'll see if that continues here in the future. But I'd love to get a truth serum to Bailey Zappe to find out what he was actually thinking in that moment, because that must have been completely insane for him.
So this raises one more question, then we'll get to the offensive line, because those two are absolutely linked. They cut Bailey Zappe, I think, to create an extra roster spot for an 11th offensive lineman, or maybe it was Kevin Harris or Ty Montgomery. But ultimately, there are 11 offensive linemen, and that's the second biggest story out of this.
Okay, so you've heard me say before that you can win with the Patriots season over at FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. You bet there, they win, you win too. Well, right now, new customers at FanDuel can bet $5 and get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's win or lose for the Patriots. Plus, all customers who bet $5 will get $100 off NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. This is for all you folks who live outside New England. Now is the best time to join FanDuel. The app is easy to use. You can be on with everything from spreads to player props and more. We give out bets here in the podcast all the time. More are coming. Listen and bet on FanDuel, and visit FanDuel.com/Boston and kick off the NFL season with an offer you don't want to miss from FanDuel, the official partner of the NFL.
Bailey Zappe struggling in Bill O'Brien's offense. And Pharaoh Brown arriving today as a tight end who played under Bill O'Brien. And he's going to play for a position coach in Will Lawing, who is here because Bill O'Brien is here and has had input on the coaching staff. And that's it. Will Lawing never stepped foot in Foxborough, as far as I'm concerned, except as a member of the Houston Texans under Bill O'Brien. All of this coming together says to me, maybe Bill O'Brien has a little more input on the personnel with Bill Belichick and Matt Groh and Steve Cargile. Do you buy any of that?
Certainly wouldn't be surprised. That's not something I know. That's not something that I've heard, that it was Bill O'Brien decided to cut Bailey Zappe. That was not anything that I've been told or heard or anything.
That would be Belichick's call. But
right.
O'Brien's input is clearly weighing heavily in Foxborough, and frankly,
right.
as it should.
And that's why I mentioned earlier, it's a new offense. Bill O'Brien has obviously all the say in the world in what the Patriots are putting out there offensively. And if they thought that Bailey Zappe was a better fit for what Joe Judge and Matt Patricia were doing last year than what Bill O'Brien was doing this year, those pieces all fit together. Bill O'Brien has been a general manager in the past, maybe not an overly successful one. So maybe you don't want him to have too much control over what's going on in the roster. But I think coaches get input anyway, but I certainly wouldn't be surprised if someone as experienced as Bill O'Brien has a little bit more. We haven't actually seen a lot of the Patriots bringing in players who have experience in Bill O'Brien's system, but let's say if they sign AJ McCarron or something like that, not saying that's going to happen or anything, but then I think eyebrows really start to get raised, because that would be another guy who's been with Bill O'Brien. And it's been long enough since Bill O'Brien's really coached players. Like it's 2019 essentially. Like he was with Houston for a little bit of 2020, but it's kind of funny if you're out of the league for that long, 4 years or whatever it is. The players who used to play under you kind of dwindle a little bit. Like I was even looking at some of the quarterbacks that played under him. It's like, well, Tom Savage isn't in the NFL anymore. You know, I mean, that feels like such a bygone era, even though it was only 2018 or 2019. So we'll see if they start to sign more guys who played under Bill O'Brien and everything like that. But no, it certainly would not surprise me if he had some input there.
Not only because he's the offensive coordinator and someone who's been a head coach, you mentioned as a GM, but he's the quarterback's coach. Okay. Right. So he would know best with Bailey Zappe. I don't know that for a fact either. This is not to be aggregated or passed on, but I think it's worth speculating because, you know, just in the same way that Bill Belichick valued Joe Judge's experience and input last year as now a former head coach, granted it was just 2 years and didn't go too well. I think he's certainly going to take that input from Bill O'Brien. As someone who's more qualified and proven and established and just a better coach than Joe Judge. So at least you would hope. So if it falls in his area of expertise, this obviously does. I wouldn't be surprised if Bill O'Brien maybe push this over the goal line if Bill or Groh were kind of on the fence. Okay, one area where they're not adding players from Bill O'Brien's time in Houston is the offensive line, because that room is stocked. It is filled with giant, big, sweaty men. I don't know if they have enough chairs because they have 11 linemen, and here they are. Trent Brown, Cole Strange, David Andrews, Mike Onwenu, Riley Reif, Sidney Sal, Jake Andrews, Antonio Mafi, Fedarian Lowe, Tyrone Wheatley Jr., and Calvin Anderson. First of all, great to see Calvin Anderson. That man is smiling. He is grateful. He is so happy to be back in football after what he described as a serious illness. We don't have full details. He's going to disclose them later, but said he worried for his football future in the early days of this illness that was onset sometime by the end of minicamp to the beginning of training camp. So, again, I said at the outset, this is a lot. This is excessive. This is, plan C, D, and E being on your 53-man roster. I would expect some sort of change, but they put Tyquan Thornton on IR today, and Riley Reif is still in the 53-man roster. What do you think happens in the next few days?
Certainly wouldn't be surprised if Reif also goes to IR. Not to get into like the too nitty-gritty of details, but
yeah, do it.
I mean, like Riley Reif's agent isn't someone who's going to tell anyone that Riley Reif is going on injured reserve. Like that's just kind of the reality that we live in, where sometimes this information gets out, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it's team sources, and like that's not something that the team might necessarily put out there. But I don't know, like no one's necessarily like, I don't think that anyone really knows Riley Reif's family or anything like that. So I don't know. It's just it's unlikely that information would get out that he's going on IR. So I certainly would not be surprised if on Thursday, Riley Reif and Tyquan Thornton go on injured reserve. The Patriots fill those roster spots one way or the other.
Let me say this for folks who, are for some reason 20 minutes into a podcast, in case they, think less of us as reporters. That agent is Bill Belichick's agent. Okay. Yeah. That's why he's not talking to any reporters about any transactions. It's not that Doug and I can't get a hold of him or pissed him off or he's not texting us back, which has certainly happened before. Don't get us wrong. But that's why he's not telling any agent.
Yeah, let's just say that there's a reason why James Ferentz, it never gets leaked out that James Ferentz is getting cut. And it never gets leaked out that James Ferentz is going to re-sign to the practice squad because he also shares an agent with Riley Reif and Bill Belichick. And that information just one way or the other does not get passed along. So, and like, I think that goes both ways, where the team also just doesn't talk about those guys. Yeah. But would not be surprised if he gets placed on IR and then you're dealing with 10 offensive linemen, which is still a lot, but you need it because there's no guarantee that Calvin Anderson will be ready for week 1 because he was on the non-football illness list for so long. There's no guarantee right now that we know of that Michael Onwenu is going to be ready for week 1. I don't think that there's necessarily a guarantee that Cole Strange will be ready for week 1. So usually you'd probably only like to keep around 8 or 9 offensive linemen. And right now, given the fact that 4 of these guys, you don't know their status, you need 11 of them. And it's an unfortunate circumstance, but that's what's going on here. So I think that that's the next step here. And then you basically just have to see in the next week and a half if Onwenu can play, if Cole Strange can play, what's going on with Calvin Anderson, and what your backup plans are if those guys can't go.
So I think we should just cut to the chase because we can do offensive lineman talk forever, but I think we're going to
Hell
lose
yeah.
the folks who are still hanging around with us. The point is, and I said this on the radio this morning, there are 5 different players who could start for them at right tackle, and just right tackle. There are Riley Reif, Sidney Sow, Fadarian Lowe, Tyrone Wheatley Jr., who hasn't played a single snap in the NFL, but I like this preseason tape. That's why I made fake trades, and Calvin Anderson. Okay. Like Bill Belichick said 3 times, they had balls in the air Tuesday morning before all these roster cuts. He could have said it 10 more times and still would have been, on point and wouldn't have said it too many times. So my thing about this is,
I'll throw a 6th in there too. I don't think it's going to happen, but like Michael Onwenu could start at right tackle. Like he's done it in the past. Like I said, I don't think it's going to happen because of the injury, because of the lack of training camp, everything like that. But like, there's actually a 6th I think I would throw in there too.
Making my head spin. I'm literally just seeing balls in the air, just cycle through as you go through that. And you also got a very tiny, I would say 0.3% of the fan base, very excited, who have been nagging for this forever. And I don't believe them, Mike Onwenu playing right tackle, but I'm in agreement with you. I don't think it'll happen. Here's the thing I do think will happen. The Patriots starting offensive line against the Eagles in their season opener will be drastically different than in week 2 against the Dolphins. I think it is too soon to ask Cole Strange and Mike Onwenu, and Calvin Anderson, who virtually missed all of training camp. Okay, Cole Strange got hurt on July 31st, the first padded practice, to jump in against arguably the best defensive line in football in a new offense in the opener and just go. I do think one of them will play, and I think it will be Mike Onwenu because between him and Strange, he's more experienced, not only just within their system, which again is new, but it's not totally new in the league, but as someone who's been ramping up for a while. Cole Strange got ramped up, participated in practice, then had to cool down, okay, because he just couldn't practice. He couldn't do anything on that leg. And Mike Onwenu returned to practice sooner than Cole Strange. So I think, this is my guess, and I want to hear yours after. From left to right, the Patriots offensive line, this guess here on August 30th for their season opener will go Trent Brown at left tackle, Antonio Mafi at left guard, 5th-round rookie at UCLA, David Andrews, Mike Onwenu. I feel like I should roll a die. Mike Reese had dice on ESPN today. Why can't I have dice here on Pat's Interference? I'll say Fadarian Lowe, because that's a guy who, unlike Tyrone Wheatley, has played some NFL snaps, played mostly on the left side, but a little bit on the right side. I don't think Calvin Anderson will be ready. Sidney Sow could be an option, but then I think you're asking for trouble with a 4th-round rookie playing a new position. And then Tyrone Wheatley Jr. just hasn't played an NFL snap in a regular season. So that's my 5. But there could be a dozen other options.
I think if they do that, then you might as well put Bailey Zappe back there. I think I'm going to be a little bit more optimistic, maybe.
Okay.
And go Trent Brown, Cole Strange, David Andrews, Mike Onwenu, and then this one's the terrifying one. I think if the season started today, I think it would be Sidney Sow at right tackle. Obviously, there is a week and a half left until week 1 and things could change, but he's the guy who's actually played in this offensive line and practiced, and he's practiced all summer. He's been in that right tackle spot for a while. I don't think it's necessarily gone particularly well in the preseason, but he's at least got more experience in this offense and under Adrian Clem than Wheatley and Fadarian Lowe. I'm not convinced at all that Strange and Onwenu play. You're probably right that it's probably only going to wind up being one of them. I just don't know which one. And quite honestly, if they can't play, the Patriots are losing against the Eagles, and I wouldn't want to get Mac Jones killed. I know it'd be insane to throw out Bailey Zappe in week 1, but you almost might as well at that point. I feel I know that anything can happen in the NFL, blah, 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 but putting a battered offensive line out there against it seems like it's going to be a recipe for disaster.
Well, I'll go back to what I wrote 3 weeks ago, that Bill O'Brien has been preparing for this, to work around an offensive line, design an offense, call it, orchestrate it, all those things, knowing he can't trust 5 of the 11 players in the field, or at least that unit that they comprise, the offensive line. And he's worked around it through RPOs and screens and a small dose of play action. And I think when you throw all those together and add in tempo, that's how they're going to try to solve the Eagles, whether their offensive line is healthy or not. So I think there is a path. The path is still holding the Eagles to 21 points or fewer, because you're just not going to run up the score on their defense. But what the RPOs and the play action and the tempo will also do, in addition to tiring out their defensive line, is attack the weaknesses of their personnel on that side, which are the linebackers who are totally fresh and new, and the safeties. These downfield RPOs where they're making reads of the safeties and where they commit to either run or pass or the overhang defender or whatever they're doing, and then to throw it behind them or hand it off. Like, that's where those are going to come into play. And I think they're going to be confident. I mean, Kendrick Bourne said as much today. You're always confident going into the season opener, blah, blah, blah. But I think there is a path. Who it is, though, I just gave a starting lineup. You gave one. Odds are we're both wrong. But it's just, that's where they're at. And the last thing I'll say is this, because I wrote this the other day. To me, this goes back to their offseason. If you had just signed a proven established tackle, I don't want to belabor the point. That was March. We're all in the same boat that this offensive line isn't good enough. But the thing is, if it was Orlando Brown Jr. coming back instead of Riley Reif, you would know that once he's healthy, he can play, he can start. Your tackles are fine. And then it's just a matter of, are the guards healthy enough? Because yes, it's been a lot of bad injury luck. But if Riley Reif returns, you still don't know if he's good enough because he's 34 and he hasn't played right tackle with the starting offense since the second day of camp. And he's been at right guard in the preseason finale because he wasn't good enough and they needed the bodies. So it's a bummer they need 11 offensive linemen to field 5, 6, 7, 8 healthy ones. Mm-hmm. But they also don't know of those 5, 6, 7, or 8, how many they can trust because they haven't seen Calvin Anderson in their system and starting, or Riley Reif, or Connor McNerney, who's now on IR. So that's it's a talent and an injury issue. Anything more before we go to the defense and kind of run down the rest of the roster?
No, just Patriots only kept 2 running backs from Andre Stevenson and Elliott, but they were able to bring back Ty Montgomery and Kevin Harris on their practice squad. Honestly, I'd probably still look at some outside options there. I don't know, but the fact that they've got Elliott behind Stevenson, they could probably still do most of what they're doing. If Elliott goes in there, it wouldn't be quite as efficient, but just there's a pretty major drop off to me from Stevenson or Elliott down to Kevin Harris at this point.
Yep. And that with those 2 running backs on the practice squad, it'll limit the number of players. Of course, there is a limit on how many you can elevate for game day. Yeah. And now you're picking between a quarterback, a running back, or 2 of them. And then what else are you going to do? There's also a limit to how many times each player can be promoted. It's 3 times per player before they have to just be added to the active roster. So again,
wouldn't be shocked if Montgomery was one of the guys who got signed to the 53 with Thornton or Reif going down. Yes. Just to solve that issue.
Yeah, and I agree. Or Zappe, or we've heard reports of Calvin Munson being in the mix. Yeah. But of those 3, I would start with Montgomery, then Zappe, and then Calvin Munson. Right. The receivers, you mentioned Tyquan Thornton going to IR. I'd heard last week that Kayshon Boutte was, of course, it's right after the 53-man roster projection I drop on this podcast. Yeah, pretty much a lock. Okay, well, I would have loved to have known that just before I had recorded. He makes the team. DeMario Douglas makes the team. Juju Smith-Schuster, Kendrick Bourne, Devontae Parker, who was missing from practice today, but according to someone I talked to, is fine. Not totally surprising because Thornton we all saw get hurt, and we haven't seen him since, except in the locker room today, wheeling as fast as he could out because the media had arrived. Pretty straightforward there, yeah? Yeah, pretty straightforward there at wide receiver. Pretty much what everyone had been expecting over the last 4 or 5 days, I guess, at this point. But yeah. Okay. And I'll just say this because I included it in the column too. Boutte had a good camp. DeMario Douglas is their number 4 receiver. Ideally, 2 6-round receivers, though, are not players you might have to count on whenever Devontae Parker misses a game. And Tyquan Thornton's already missing time, which is both an injury issue and a talent one, because you don't know how many of those guys you can trust for a full season. But they'll find out. Maybe they surprise. I'd also say that the Patriots didn't take a skill position player until the 6th round. And at the time, I think a lot of people were saying hey, if you're going to take wide receivers in the 6th round, it might as well be a total flyer like Kayshon Boutte and someone who's his only bad attribute is height in DeMario Douglas. And to this point, it worked out pretty well for them. So we'll see how those guys go in the future. You would have liked to have someone else in the mix there, but I do want to give them credit for at this point hitting on those 2 6-rounders. Yep, that's totally fair. And we'll see how they do in the regular season. But Pop Douglas, they were hiding in the preseason. So that tells you how they feel about him internally. Okay, defensively, defensive line, no surprises. Carl Davis was the only one for me. He was, he was above my bubble boy tier. And he gets cut, admits on Instagram that he just wasn't as locked in. My understanding is he's going to take a month to train and get himself back into shape. Had an injury from that preseason opener against Houston. And he might be back, I think, from what I've heard. So beyond that, anything on the defensive line? No. I mean, the
the Patriots had 7 defensive linemen last year. They've got 7 again this year. And it's basically just Keon White replacing Carl Davis. And they're different players, obviously, but that's that number. It seems like that they want set on the defensive line. So no, I mean, I know that Lawrence Guy was a popular, potential surprise cut at some points during the offseason. That never came to fruition. We'll see if he still keeps his starting role in the defense, but otherwise no surprises.
8 linebackers: Matt Judon, Anthony Jennings, Josh Uche, Juwan Bentley, Jelani Tavai, Marte Mapu, Chris Board, who's going to be more of a special teamer. Mm-hmm. Mack Wilson Sr. Mack Wilson was one of the last players, I think, to make this roster in a late pick to be a surprise cut. I still had him on. I think his work on the edge, where he's shown some flashes, frankly, of just kind of this speed and burst, helped him make the team. I don't think he's going to convert full-time to outside linebacker, obviously. But if and when Marte Mapu gets more reps, tightens up his tackling, and becomes a player we've seen dating back to the spring, they've got depth there, and they also have someone who can maybe play in third down. And that, I think, might make Mack Wilson, who was benched in weeks 3 and 4 last year and then hardly seen again, possibly expendable if he suffers from the same issues of eye discipline that we saw and some tackling problems early last season. Ideally, you hope it's fixed. He's a young guy, super talented, but if they need to clear a roster spot, I wouldn't be surprised to see him go late September, early October.
No, I wouldn't be shocked. I think that he's kind of a good example of what I was kind of alluding to earlier, where I think it sets a good precedent for the Patriots to say, Bailey Zappe, you weren't good enough this summer. You struggled. We have to cut you. Whereas Mack Wilson, could have been, he might have been, who knows, the 52nd or 53rd player, whatever it is, to make this roster. But I thought that he actually had a pretty decent camp, not only, playing on the edge, but he made some plays in coverage, deflected some passes. There were some times out there where I was kind of forgetting which one of those guys was Mack Wilson, which one was Jabril Peppers, which for Wilson is certainly a good thing because I was kind of confusing him with the safety out there at times. So he actually made some plays in camp, and I think that he earned his spot on the roster in training camp. When it was, when he signed, there was definitely no guarantee that he was going to make this team.
And the Peppers Wilson thing also goes to just a number. People at home being like, how could you not tell them apart? Blah, blah, blah. Right. It's a 3 and a 5. So when they're going as fast as they do, and Mack Wilson is fast.
Didn't Peppers wear 3 last year too?
Yeah, I believe so. So yeah, it's a little different. But Mack Wilson, you're right. He earned his spot. I'm just, knowing how last year went, and Marte Mapu continuing to ascend is just something I've got my eye on. Cornerbacks, 7 here if you include Amir Speed, who our understanding is going to play primarily on special teams. Certainly impressed there. But let's call it 6. Take Speed off the table. You've got Christian Gonzalez, Jonathan Jones, Jack Jones, Marcus Jones, Miles Bryant, and Shaun Wade. Shaun Wade feels like, to me, another player who, not to the degree of Mack Wilson, but certainly earned his spot with his performance in practices, multiple pass breakups, and not because the quarterbacks were just picking on him like they were Isaiah Bolden for a while. He earned this spot, but it seems like he's here because Jack Jones might not be soon, pending his legal case, any suspension or placement on the commissioner's list. Am I wrong?
No, but he's also here because of Bailey Zappe, because a lot of those deflected passes came against Bailey Zappe. So I just want to throw that out there as well, that Shaun Wade kind of benefited from Bailey Zappe's poor play out there. I did think it was kind of funny. I don't think anyone expected Shaun Wade to make the roster. That was like a few people had, 51 out of 53, and he was one of the guys that we hadn't predicted. Just because I couldn't really see them keeping 7 cornerbacks, if you include Amir Speed. And then you can throw Jalen Mills in the mix there too, because he serves as depth from that safety position since he's played cornerback before. But I did think it was a little bit funny that when he was in the roster, everyone was like, I think some reporters were talking to him, congratulating him for making everything. And I'm thinking maybe in the back of his mind, he's like, I've been on this roster for the last 2 years. I'm not some undrafted rookie who made the roster. I've been on this team the last 2 years, but still, it was obviously somewhat unexpected for him to make it. I do think it's because of the uncertainty about Jack Jones. You need another cornerback on the roster. And quite frankly, as you mentioned, with his play on the field in practice, he earned this spot.
He did. And he played a little bit of safety. He's, he became a prospect in college with outstanding play as a slot corner at Ohio State. They moved him on the outside for his junior year. bottomed out, but still became a 5th-round pick that the Ravens shipped up after a couple months of training camp. And here he's been since, as you mentioned, really a professional healthy scratch for them on the 53-man roster, but nonetheless here. And he's never looked better. So credit to Shaun Wade, his persistence in his preseason. Speaking of corners, Isaiah Bolden goes to IR. He's out for the season. We all saw the scary concussion. Mm-hmm. He's made progress. He's in the building. Connor McDermott also to IR. Not surprising because had he been released, he wasn't going anywhere. Both of them get to stay, rehab, be a part of the team in some capacity. Any other thoughts there? Like, I think for Bolden, he's a guy who needs reps. You won't get them in practice, obviously. Yeah. They could still be released with an injury settlement, by the way. But it's a bummer for him because you could see the raw talent, even if it still needs, I think, a good deal of reps to, be put in a way or to be utilized in a way that he's a guy next year you go, yeah, he can make the roster.
Yeah, and usually those injury settlements happen when a player is waived injured, clear waivers, revert to injured reserve. Then that's usually a scenario where a guy will be.
Thank you.
I'm sure it's happened in the past where if you put him on IR before, but I think that Trey Nixon or Terez Hall, those kind of guys would be more of the waived when the injury settlement. But no, not anything other major actual player wise. I will say that Joshua Bledsoe was one who was on the team last year, was on, I think, injured reserve the year before. Mm-hmm. He didn't make it on the team. And we'll see how he winds up doing on the practice squad. I think that he could still be a guy who could be called up at some point, but he was waived. He was wearing number 24. That opens up number 24 for Christian Gonzalez if he wants it, or if Bill Belichick wants to give Christian Gonzalez number 24. So that's an important element to throw in here as well. I still want to see Christian Gonzalez wearing number 0.
Yes, I was just going to say, pick 0 or 24, and understanding Tylaw and Darrelle Revis and was it Jonathan Wilhite who had that, who didn't deserve it?
It was Jonathan Wilhite. It was. But yeah, Stephon Gilmore.
Poor guy catching strays as he's trying to go to bed here on a Wednesday night. 0 or 24 though for Christian pick.
Yeah. 24 is my favorite number, I think, for athletes. So I'd probably go 24.
Okay. I'm going to go 0. He's a tall, lanky ass dude. He can carry and win with 0 on his back. Hell, Jason Tatum's been doing it obviously in a much different capacity, but that is the last comparison of Christian Gonzalez. Jason Tatum, you will hear in this podcast. Trey Flowers and Cody Davis still on PUP. Yep. No updates there. They're basically ghosts. Farrell Brown, I mentioned earlier. Quick note on him. Only 15 in the practice squad. They still have an open spot down there. Farrell Brown is 6'6", 258 pounds. He's only had one season with more than 14 catches, never more than 171 yards. He is the epitome of a journeyman, but his familiarity with Bill O'Brien, again, I think is the reason that he's here. In addition to the fact, Matt Sokol wasn't good enough. Anthony Firkser wasn't good enough. Firkser wasn't on the field today, not on the practice squad. Sokol is. And so they still need a third tight end. And you could argue a second one because of the way Mike Gesicki supposedly is going to be utilized. So that's it.
Yeah, I think that's another element to keeping 11 offensive linemen, a much lesser one, but some of those guys might be used as second tight ends in kind of jumbo formation, or not jumbo formations, but like in a typical running play where you want to be in 12 personnel, it might wind up being an offensive tackle rather than someone else. And like maybe Tyrone Wheatley, given his experience at tight end, kicks out there at that jumbo tight end spot.
Took the words out of my mouth, the feature out of my drafts right now as I'm working on that. Tyrone Wheatley, man, 310-pound tight end at Stony Brook. Can you imagine just rolling in from Colgate or Maine, trying to play the Seawolves of Stony Brook, and you have to face this 310-pound dude from outer space / the University of Michigan, son of Tyrone Wheatley, former running back. Terrifying. Anyway, I'm going to have those terrifying stories next week in a feature about him. And I think you're absolutely right because they did that last year. They've done it in the past, not only just the 6 lineman sets, but guys who are athletic enough to threaten, quote unquote, as a pass catcher. And maybe that's him. Okay, we have a big mailbag to get through. Let's do this quickly so we can go to bed and post this up for the folks to listen to. First one comes from HC, York Sports. Have your expectations of the team changed or stay the same now that the roster is finalized and training camp and preseason is over?
I guess it's probably changed a little bit for me. Like it depends on where we're setting this bar. Like when is the beginning of the expectations versus the end? If like
start training camp to where we are now.
Start training camp. I think they've changed. I think that they're higher than they would have been. I know that there's a lot of issues there on the offensive line, and maybe I'm just like getting too influenced by things that don't necessarily matter, but everyone in this offense just seems jazzed, or at least like Mac Jones does, the wide receivers do, the tight ends do. There seems to be genuine confidence about Mac Jones, about Bill O'Brien, and about this offense. And none of that matters if the offensive line craters and ruins the entire season. But I don't know. It just, the attitude around the offense and the team just seems so much different this year, where the offense seems to be catching up to the defense. I think the defense still seems to be, could be an elite unit this year. We'll see how that all works out with replacing Devin McCourty. But yeah, I think my expectations would be a little bit higher coming out of the summer.
Mine are the same, 9-8 or 10-7. Make it happen. I get the Vegas stuff, the difficult schedule, and I'm not knocking it. The issues in the offensive line theoretically should be solved with time. Adrian Clem, I wrote 3 weeks ago, you're under pressure, dude. You got to develop these guys and make it happen. Oh, Biscuits asks, quote, it feels like Zappe's poor OTAs in camp weren't really pointed out that much until we saw in the preseason games. Now it feels like a lot of victory laps are being taken. All I heard is that Mac was clearly the starter. Could you elaborate on what you saw during open practices from Zappe? We've covered this already. I listed off the stats, his issues with passes being batted at the line. He at least averaged one per practice when you include all of them. So all I'm going to do here is just going to read from the aforementioned duds section of my practice reports. This was from the last final practice report I filed. Quote, for a backup quarterback, Zappe's performance met that mark. His mistakes were the same that availed him throughout camp, batted balls and holding onto the ball too long in the pocket. He had 3 passes knocked down at the line and took 2 would-be sacks 8 days earlier. So not the last day of camp, but the week before. Quote, Zappe took 6 sacks in team drills. He threw an interception on a dead running back screen that cornerback Shaun Wade revived when he picked off the pass and went back for a would-be pick 6. Zappe hardly inspired over his 2-minute drill, which ended with a sack, throwaway completion to Kayshon Boutte, and handoff to J.J. Taylor. So some of us were documenting it. I think the focus more was on Mac once he became the starter, because believe it or not, that was an issue, quote unquote, at the start of camp. And you just figured, of course the Patriots are going to roster a backup quarterback. He just doesn't look good.
It just was not even on anyone's radar that they would cut Bailey Zappe, because I think the other thing in play here, I feel bad saying this, but like Trace McSorley was so bad that there was no competition for the second string spot. And no one would have possibly expected them to cut everyone other than Mac Jones. I'll also throw in there that like I wrote the word scramble down way too often when charting Bailey Zappe's completions and targets this summer. Where like, you don't want the 4.9 guy getting sacked and then taking off running or whatever in practice because sacks don't actually count. Like, he was just holding the ball way too long all the time. And I think a lot of those plays where he actually wound up running would have been sacks, and that would have never happened. But like, it's just a pointless rep when it ends with Bailey Zappe running down the field. And that happened far too often.
Yeah. And at least no victory laps taken here or on Doug's behalf. Like, you don't see or take any pleasure in a player getting cut. You love to be right, but not in this sense. And none of us were right. So if someone's taking a victory lap, I don't know, but find a hobby. Epri, E-P-R-I, quote, this is the 3rd season of Mac's rookie contract. The talent of the roster is middling. Epri's in a bad mood. The expectations are shrinking, and there seems to be no urgency to take advantage of the cheap quarterback. I guess my question would be, if not now, when? It's a great point. And I think this goes undersaid and stated, frankly, across the media, because we get, really into the weeds and we zoom out sometimes. We talk about Mac, but it's always in a different context. Not the fact that every other team in the league treats their young quarterbacks as having a window. And that window is the length of their deal and how cheap it is. My response would be, the Patriots are not going all in because they typically don't. You could argue maybe they never have. But the other part about this is you can't go all in a quarterback that you don't fully believe in. And I don't think it's unfair to say the Patriots don't have enough reason to believe Mac Jones could be their guy, to support him now and make it happen. They, from what I understand, believe that they need to make him comfortable. And I would argue they haven't done that well enough, but they're not going to spend money and cost future cap space for players that are not going to be good enough because maybe Mac isn't good enough to have a collective where they could be Super Bowl bound. And I think that's the reason why you might have your powder dry. And the only one really that would make sense to me.
Yeah, I mean, they kind of did in 2021. Obviously, they didn't know that Mac Jones would be their quarterback on a rookie deal, but they did spend a lot of money that year. And I think that they do still have one more year to do it in 2024. And maybe they did just want to see like, all right, we got to figure out if Mac Jones is the guy before we go all in. So let's give him one more season with Bill O'Brien. If he impresses, if we pick up that 5th-year option, then maybe we throw the money at the team in 2024. We're going to have a ton of cap space in the future. And actually, I think, even if they do have to sign, like, even if they do pick up the 5th-year extension, even if they do sign Mac to an extension, they're still going to have a lot of money to spend on players. So this is kind of a good time to do it. But this is, without giving too much away of a column that I'm writing for Sunday, like, this is a make or break year for Mac Jones, where this season is going to decide whether he's going to be the Patriots' future franchise quarterback, or in the position that Bailey Zappe was in this year as a backup quarterback, like trying to make a roster as a back. Like, I just, that's what's going to happen this year. If Mac Jones plays as badly as he did last year, as poorly as he did last year, he's probably going to be a backup quarterback next year. And if he plays really well this season, then he'll probably be the Patriots quarterback for the next 3 or 4 years at least. So
yeah,
I don't know. And that's what they have to decide this year.
You've got a great piece coming out about this and what people think around the league about Mac. Please read Doug's piece. It's going to be excellent, the feedback, the things that I've heard and read from it so far. The comparison I made, though, is the fork in the road is Baker Mayfield, who went from being the Browns' first-round quarterback, great rookie year, ascending. Oh, and then he's Panther. Oh, now he's a Ram.
Right.
Oh, Tampa Bay just said Baker Mayfield's their starting quarterback. Or are you going to be Dak Prescott, who had another stellar rookie season, suffered a year 2 regression, and then bounced back and is obviously the quarterback down there, though things are never just settled in Dallas. Something has to be wrong. Speaking of cap space. And then we'll get to Gary's question, and I'll let you think on this now. He asked over and under 0.5 contract extensions announced between now and week 1. If you pick the over, who's the player getting extended? Why do you think about that? Cap space matters. Cash spending matters more. And I'll say this, Jonnu Smith got a lot of cash and is still taking up cap space because of the hard cash spent, the guaranteed money that was spent in him, to the point 2 years after that 2021 spending spree. Do you know who the second highest paid player is on the Patriots offense?
Is it Jonnu Smith?
It's Jonnu Smith. So this money matters when he had a lower cap hit in 21, bigger in 2022. They trade him. He's still on the book for 2023 because of the dead cap that he left behind on that deal. So when the Patriots, need to go all in and do this, and they could do it now on max window, like if they do that in next offseason, you're going to have players still with big cap hits in 24, 25, and 26. It's a little different because we're going to have giant market growth, expected market growth with the cap going up. But anyway, that's another conversation. Okay, the extension, over under.
I'd probably go under. If I went over, I probably would say Kyle Duggar at this point. But I'll go under. It hasn't happened yet. Like, if it hasn't happened for the last 30 days or whatever it is, then like, what's necessarily going to change? I know that deadlines change things, but I'd probably still go under.
So I'm going to go over just to take the low-hanging fruit, being the good guy positive on the podcast.
Yeah.
But my instinct is to say under. And the only reason to believe in this, because in writing about this about a month ago, the suggestion that Kyle Duggar's agency has not reached a deal with the Patriots this late in the process is a bad sign, without going more into the weeds about that dynamic and relationship. But the Patriots still have a lot of dry powder, like I mentioned, and why they might be keeping that dry because they don't believe in Mac. They sure as hell believe in Kyle Duggar. And Kyle wants to maximize his second contract. He's already 27. Totally understandable. The Patriots should want to keep that guy in-house, draft pick, homegrown talent, to be probably a Pro Bowl safety this year. And I think you spend some of that money now, keep him on the books. And they've done it with Jonathan Jones, Shaq Mason, 2019 and 18 respectively. Hopefully that changes here. Cy asks, quote, now that the 53-man roster is, quote, set, you get to pick one biggest season-long surprise from each of the offensive and defensive side of the ball. Who do you got? So basically breakout player.
Yeah. I feel like this is almost impossible at this point because we've dissected every single player on the roster, to such a large degree. So they're like, I genuinely don't think you could pick a surprise contributor because we've talked about everyone so much. But so I would probably say Demario Douglas and Marte Mapu. I know that those don't sound like surprise contributors, but who else may I pick? Hunter Henry or, whoever else would be, Jalen Mills, I guess, might be in there. But yeah, Douglas, I think, still has the potential once he gets healthy, fully in there, to be I think he could ascend into a number 3 wide receiver role. I don't know who he would ascend above, because I do believe in Juju Smith-Schuster, Kendrick Bourne, and Devontae Parker, but I do think that that's a possibility. And from Apu, we just haven't really seen much of what he's going to do at this point, but I do think that there's a possibility that they've almost been kind of hiding him as well, and that when they roll out their defense in week 1, that he could be a starter. Like, they just shock the hell out of everyone, like take Jabril Peppers out of there or something like that, and just say like, hey, we really like this guy. He really impressed us. He's a starter. Let's let him sink or swim. So those would be my 2 guys.
Jabril Peppers is my one on defense.
Nice.
I've been riding this early in camp. The trouble is, I think he's just, a little bit of a narrow player. Like, you're not going to ask him to cover much in man, but he hits. He covers running backs and tight ends. He can be in zone, very instinctive. I think he's harnessing his natural talent better than he ever has before, and he fits his system. He's more comfortable. That's my guy. Antonio Mafi is the last one. I think you're, again, starting left guard for week 1, maybe beyond, but he's been repping with the starters for a long time now, and I think that's a guy who has a lot of college experience and still upside, because he started on defense at UCLA and obviously is no longer there. So 2 more. Jaeger wants to know, where are the explosive plays going to come from?
Demario Douglas, maybe. Otherwise,
and this is a good question from Jaeger, because Warren Sharp tweeted today the 8 most explosive offenses, those generating chunk plays, to 15 yards on the ground, 20 or more by the air. The 8 most explosive offenses last year all made the playoffs.
Right. Maybe Devontae Parker. I know he's not like a speed demon out there, but we saw him making a lot of big plays in practice. He's the one who made the most big plays for the Patriots this summer. So in all reality, if there's going to be explosive plays, they would probably come from Devontae Parker.
I'm going to say scheme, play action shots. I think yards after the catch for Juju. That's why he's here. He better make it happen. And occasional screens, like RPO play action screens, like that's just gonna have to be it. Like I think Devontae Parker's a good pick. I just think he's going to miss some games, and you need to find some other outlets. Demario Douglas, though, just get him the ball in space. Let him cook. Last one, Jeff, quote, if Bourne has a good season, defined as, this would be career high, 900 yards or more, do you see the Patriots trying to re-sign him, or is Booty the heir apparent for that role? Jeff showing off his receiver terminology knowledge. The Z receiver / possession guy. That's great after the catch. He is great after the catch. Expected yards after the catch for Kendrick Bourne last year, I think it was 3.5 yards over expectation based on where he caught the ball, proximity to the defenders, route, location, blah, 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 blah. So anyway, Bourne re-signed, or do they stick with Booty?
Yeah, no, I could definitely see him re-signing Kendrick Bourne. I don't think that you take as a wide receiver in the 6th round and say like, hey, this is our replacement for Kendrick Bourne. I don't think that I know they play similar positions and that they'd have similar roles in the offense, but I don't think that drafting Kayshon Boutte would preclude them from re-signing Kendrick Bourne. I think it would ultimately be like some other factor other than Kayshon Boutte.
Yeah, someone asked me on Twitter today who disagreed with the column. Totally fine. Disagree away. This is the waters I'm wading into doing more opinion stuff. You don't see Kayshon Boutte as a starting caliber player. No, of course I don't.
Right.
Come on. He's had a good camp. He ascended. He grew. I understand what he did in 2020. I don't want to hear about 2020 anymore.
Right.
He could prove it very well. Week 1, 2, and 3, and 4, and that's enough. If he starts and shows out, good for him. I'll say it. But you need to know how these rookies function in the NFL. They've never done this before against this level of competition, being a pro week in and week out. If it's week 6 and he's caught 2 passes on 3 targets, how is he going to handle that in the locker room? Is he going to pout thinking he's better than the guys ahead of him? Or is he going to step up and get deeper into his playbook and take advantage of those opportunities? I don't know. He doesn't know. The coaching staff does not know. So I would just say wait on Boutte. Bourne, though, I have a little bit of intel, and that's that the Patriots have not even approached him about a contract extension yet. And Matt Groh said they have conversations every year with all the players going into the last years of their contracts. That was in late July when he spoke to us last. They have not done so with Kendrick Bourne. So as of now, I would be surprised, but I'm not going to rule it out. So that's that. Well,
Bourne seems happy. He seems very happy this year.
Here's hoping we don't have to re-sign you, Doug Kyed, because I don't know what I would do with this podcast or with our coverage for the Patriots, which, of course, you could find us at thebostonherald.com, at Doug Kyed, Kyed on Twitter. If you're not following me, I don't know what you're doing as it is now, because you found this podcast somehow without him or me. But really appreciate the time. We will see you tomorrow. It's going to be a down weekend for us. And then the regular season is here, man. We finally made it.
It's ramping back up. I'm looking forward to it. I'm looking forward to getting on a normal schedule here. That'd be
yes,
great.
for sure. All right. Please continue to send your good vibes to his daughter, Hallie. I believe some good news, hopefully, fingers crossed, coming on the way soon. And beyond that, we have a lot of stories coming out this weekend. A giant, if you're still into print newspapers, on Sunday, giant football preview. Will the Patriots make the playoffs? Will they not? We debated that. Big stories on Mac, Belichick, the whole team roster, AFC East, NFL picks, MVP, division winners, et cetera, et cetera. Lots more to come. But anyway, we need to go to bed. I'll see you tomorrow.
See you tomorrow.